Welcome to Model Minority Moms, where we talk about the meaning of success in career, family, and life. We are Jeanette Park,
Kate Wong, and Susan Liu,
Harvard classmates and Asian American working moms who get real about the pressures of fitting in while standing out. Hey, Model Minority Mom listeners, we wanted to put a call out there for you to consider becoming a paid subscriber to our Substack. That's currently the main way we're accepting listener support. And whether it's $5 a month, $10 a month, or a one-time annual subscription, will just put more fuel in our tank for us to keep on going. So, fellow Model Minority Moms, we are putting out the beacon. Please respond.
Greetings, and welcome to another episode of Model Minority Moms. Listeners, alert, alert. We've got a man in the room, and it's not our husband. For the first time in 3 years, we said, you know what? Let's invite them into the ring of fire. Everyone, we have special guest Daniel Tam-Claiborne here. He is a longtime listener with his wife. We love that our episodes spur some juicy conversations in the household. He is a multiracial writer, multimedia producer, nonprofit director of the Serica Initiative. And recently, he came out with his debut novel, Transplants, which was a PEN America finalist, which is like a big deal. He is here to talk to us about mixed race identity, fathering in a world where you're holding that, talking about postpartum depression for fathers, and figuring out how do you raise a child in this world that's mixed race. We are so excited to have Daniel here because we talked about it on our side as mothers, what we have to hold, the burden that we carry, the frustrations that we have. And boy, would we like the other perspective. So Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Susan. Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks, Kate. It's such an honor to be here. I've loved your show, and I'm so grateful to be friends with you in real life. So this is really just such a delight.
Oh, yeah. Some background information. I've known Daniel. We were actually at Yale together. And when he moved over to Seattle, we just became better friends and been on this journey as artists together. So it's really special to have you on the show. Oh. All right. I know Kate is going to kick it off for us.
Hey, I'm so excited for today because I've known Daniel for basically ever since he moved to Seattle. And I think it was Susan who introduced us. And I don't know who it was who had the idea of having Daniel on the show, maybe me and Susan, but I felt like he
is Jeanette.
Perfect.
It was me who knows
Jeanette.
Who's known Daniel.
Susan's funeral birthday.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I forgot. It was at Susan's funeral birthday party that I missed because I was sick. And Jeanette actually met Daniel because she's the only person who didn't know Daniel of the three of us. Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry, Jeanette. You had the idea. And then Susan and I were like, yeah. And I think he is a particularly perfect non-husband first male guest for our show because over the last few years, Daniel and I have had a very wide-ranging number of conversations that have been really emotionally vulnerable. I think that we, the three of us, we're Asian women, and we have only become really comfortable with being emotionally vulnerable as adults. But I still feel like out there are a lot of Asian men who have difficulty accessing that part of themselves. And I feel like Daniel very much in touch with that part of himself, and having seen his journey from Dink with his wife to having a daughter, a beautiful daughter, and now coming out with a book, I feel like this is a really good time for us to have this conversation with him. Okay, so that's my little intro and how excited I am for this conversation. And I wanted to start off, as we do with many of our conversations with guests. Daniel, can you talk a little bit, or a lot of bits, about your family background and being mixed race?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that very sweet intro, both of you, Susan and Kate. I love that, yes, it was Jeanette who was the had the idea for this as someone who has known me the least amount of time.
That's very sweet. And it had to be me. No, Kate, it was not us. Sorry. I know. I'm sorry.
No. Huge gratitude to all three of you. But yes, absolutely. As you said, Kate, yeah, I've just been very delighted to be able to have these conversations with you over 8 years now. It's been a long time.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah,
Yes.
it's been a very, very wild journey. But yes, I guess in a nutshell, so I grew up in New York. I was the child of a Chinese immigrant mother and a white Jewish American father. And I spent my childhood in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I have a younger sister. And my parents got divorced when I was very young, so I lived with my mom. And so most of the cultural cues that I get from that upbringing experience have been like Chinese coded in the sense that I felt close to my Chinese American identity because of my relationship with my mother in the way that she shared parts of her culture and her heritage with me. However, I will say there is a big caveat there, which is that my mom actually has never been to China. She was born in Cuba and her parents had escaped, the Japanese invasion. And so she was born in Havana along with my uncle, her older brother. And the reason they moved to the US was because of the rise of Fidel Castro and the mandate that he had made that boys over the age of 10 would be conscripted into the
Oh my
standing army.
gosh.
And so my
Wow.
uncle was 9 at the time. His parents, my grandparents, sent him to Florida to live with a foster family. And eventually the rest of the family got sponsored over. This is funny, right? The idea that like we actually wanted immigrants at one point in time. And so the rest of the family got sponsored over. They came up through Florida and eventually made their way to New York, where they met up with other relatives who had not made that journey to Central America, had come directly from China to New York. From there, my mom did a lot of the things that were very typical, I think, of Chinese and especially like Toisan immigrants during that time, which was her family ran a laundry. She also was a seamstress. She went to the sweatshops. And so that was a lot of her upbringing.
Jeanette has raises her hand, and I think she probably wants to ask what's Toy
Yeah,
Sun?
what's
Oh,
Toisan?
sure. Yeah, Toisan it's the southern China. It's a region where historically had been, prior to the last 50 years, had been the largest concentration of Chinese immigrants who came to the US. So the big kind of immigration waves that have hit in the periods between the Chinese Exclusion Act have come usually from that southern region of China.
Okay.
So it's like borders Hong Kong. It's in Guangdong province.
Got it.
So like the folks who built the railroads, those were by and large all Toisanese immigrants. And the dialect and the linguistic changes that we're seeing now are because a lot of the patterns of immigration have moved away from that region of China for others, especially like Fujian, I think is right now one of the more frequent kind of immigration routes that exist
it.
nowadays.
And in Mandarin, it's Taishan, right? Because Toisan is
Yeah.
more the Cantonese pronunciation.
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. Exactly. And yeah, so we grew up in New York. My mom met my dad in a Macy's elevator, and which would be a
As
more
you
romantic
do.
story. As you do. Yeah.
Oh,
But
did they get stuck? Did it get stuck?
there was no, the way that I've heard the story is that there was no kind of hijinks in the elevator. It was just a chance, like glancing meeting. And then my dad turned to his colleague who was also in the elevator and was like, I've got to meet that woman again. We need to, whatever. Again, could be a setup for a rom-com if they didn't get divorced after I was 4 or something. Anyway, all that to say, so I grew up with my mom. I had a lot of sort of Chinese influence inflected through her, but because she had never been to China and her parents had died when she was very young, it didn't feel like she was also an authority on Chinese culture. And so as a result, we went to a lot of our relatives to be the sort of the cultural standard bearers. And so aunts and uncles would be the ones who, over different kinds of cultural holidays, would be the ones to say, these are the kinds of foods we should eat. Even this is how to prepare those foods. These are the kinds of custom we should do. It's like, this is what a red envelope is. The basics were there, but in terms of these are the denominations you should give. These are the numbers that are lucky. These are the dates that are lucky. All those things were like completely not on her radar. All the way down to like when we visited her parents, my grandparents at the cemetery, it was like all of those had to happen on particular days, which had a lot of cultural significance. And she would always have to ask other relatives, like, when are we going? What are we doing? What food should we bring? All those sorts of things. And so I think as a kid, it felt like there was a sense of that identity that I had growing up, but I also felt like a huge imposter, not only because I myself didn't feel culturally adept in all those things, but because like even my mom, I was sort of like bratty, kind of frustrated in the way that like, how do we not know our own history? Shouldn't this be the most basic thing that we can understand about ourselves and the stories that we tell?
Wait.
Yeah,
How old were
sure.
you when you were saying that?
I was like 4 months. No. No. I'm sure this was more as an adult, as I gained a consciousness about it. But I think whenever the age is when sort of children are aware of like their own kind of racial identity and makeup, I don't know when that consciousness fully kicks in, but I want to say sometime in early elementary school, I feel like I imagine to be somewhat common. And I think that kind of experience happened to me around that time also, just because my sister and I always were kind of the black sheep, right? We were the only ones who were mixed. We were the only ones who didn't
Really?
speak Toisan Hua, like Taishan Hua. We didn't speak the language. Every gathering that we had with family, we were sort of mute. We weren't able to actually interact with the elders who were in the family, and always had to have our mom or one of our cousins be a conduit to translate all the comings and goings. And I think that disconnection from our sort of like ancestry and our heritage didn't necessarily, I mean, it felt like frustrating and like a little bit just uneasy at the time. There was just a degree of discomfort. But I think in reflection, there's also a great deal of loss that occurs in terms of your own consciousness about where your family lineage originates from, and to what extent you can actually learn the stories and the histories of the people who are the ones who are passing down the knowledge and the cultural rituals to you. So I think there was that sort of happening all throughout my childhood, even though there was not something that I was necessarily super conscious of, at least in the way that like adult might render those experiences. But by the time I got to college, I felt like there was an enormous opportunity to lean into that Chinese heritage a little bit more. I grew up in New York City, very diverse place.
Pause.
Please.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I have. Okay. I have two questions, but maybe I'll just ask one. You talk about you and your sister being the only mix and non-Toisan speaking people at the family gathering. I'm curious how your Chinese family that spoke Toisanese, how they saw you.
Mm.
Were they very embracing of you, accepting of
Yeah.
you, or did you feel like they also explicitly made you a second-class citizen because of your mixed race and then also
Yeah.
not speaking Toisanese?
Yeah. I wouldn't know because they're probably talking
Oh.
right behind my back, or in
Yeah.
some ways right in front of my face. But obviously my mom would have sheltered us from something. Some of the more, if there were more prickly things that were being said, she certainly wouldn't have communicated those to us. But I will say, I didn't feel a great sense of being cast out or being seen as othered. I think a lot of that was born from myself and just like the sort of chip on my shoulder that I carried with me throughout my upbringing. It's hard to say. I think there were certain experiences that I felt like I couldn't understand fully, and also that there was a closeness with my other cousins that even though they all spoke English, they were all second and third generation. It still felt to me
Right.
that we were like on the outside of some of those experiences. Like not dissimilar from I think the way that you all have described relationships with like siblings and things like that too. Like I just think you have like unease that exists like both generationally, but then also when it comes to like connection to a particular homeland. And so I think because maybe they saw us as like more Americanized, there was just like a degree of maybe we'll talk to Daniel and Hannah about these particular topics and not necessarily harp on like the things that we talk to our parents and our grandparents about.
And I also
Yeah.
have another question before we move on to college, which is
Yeah.
so like on your dad's side, because he comes from a Jewish American background, was he involved in your life? I don't know if you can talk to that a little bit. I'm just curious about that side of the family.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad is half Jewish and was very like a secular Jew. Like we never went to synagogue. I never got bar mitzvahed. Like I never did like Hebrew school, any of those kinds of also like Jewish rites of passage.
Yeah.
And we saw each other a fair amount growing up, like every other weekend, and
Yeah.
then for a good chunk of the summers. But I would say that outside of a couple of holidays, like we celebrated Passover once, we celebrated Hanukkah once, there wasn't really a whole lot that I think he also was particularly keen on like passing down in terms of the religiosity of the experience of being Jewish, as opposed to just simply what it means to be like a Jew in the world, which to me was indistinguishable from being like a New Yorker in some ways.
Yeah.
And so the two kind of went hand in hand.
Well-
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, Daniel, what you have just said about your mother and your father and their role in passing down culture and language to you, I think about that a lot with my own kids because my husband's Indian American and he comes from a Jain family. Jain is a minority religion in India, and I'm Christian and Chinese American. And I've noticed that even though he speaks English to the kids, I speak Chinese, and he's very involved in the kids' lives, and yet the kids have much more of a Chinese cultural identity, all of these things, because I think the power of the mother, even with
Yeah.
an involved father, is so strong in terms of affecting the children's link and ties to a cultural heritage. And I think this will be very relevant later on when we come back and talk about you being a father. But I just wanted to put a pin in that because I
Yeah.
see this with your own upbringing with your mother vis-a-vis your father.
No, and I think that's something that I've heard too my whole life is like the cultural line really extends through that matrilineal area. And so I think that, yeah, it's true. I took for granted the fact that in some ways people didn't see me as Jewish because my father was Jewish already. So that was already one way in which it felt for listeners who don't know, like the kind of idea that like Jewish identity similarly passes through the matrilineal line. And so if your father is Jewish, at least in the old days, like there wasn't a sense that like there wasn't any way to assure that you yourself had that kind of Jewish blood in you. Like
You'd have to convert, basically, if your dad was the Jewish one
Yeah.
and then your mom was the not Jewish person, you'd have to convert to Judaism. Whereas if your mother was Jewish,
it was
you're
assumed you
automatically
were.
Jewish.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. I think that's a really interesting thing about Judaism.
Yeah, yeah. And certainly it's not true for a lot of the sort of denominations, but certainly like in the Orthodox setting, it was that way. And it would have these memories of people like approaching me around the high holidays, and they were like from Chabad, which tends to be a little bit more of an Orthodox side of Judaism, and they would ask, "Oh, are you Jewish?" And then if you responded and said, like, "Yes," "Oh, my dad's Jewish," they would turn and look away from you. It's, "Oh, well, let me go find a real Jew." So
Yeah,
A real-
you're not a
there's
purebred or
a
whatever.
purebred, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So there was like those kind of like swirling things happening at the same time. Yeah, the identity part as well as the Asian identity part.
Yeah. So on both sides, feeling like an outsider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you feel like as a child, Daniel, and I'm sorry, we're delaying the moving on to college.
No,
We have children who are mixed race, and I think none of us, me, Susan, and Jeanette, we're not mixed race. And so I think we're very curious about the internal life of the child as you're growing up. How do you, as mixed race, mixed culture child, how did you feel growing up? Did you feel it harder to get along with people who are not mixed, or maybe you got along better with your Toisanese cousins because that was on your matrilineal side? Can you speak a little bit to that, just as a child, that you can reflect back on how you felt your inner life and your identity and all of
Yeah,
that?
and also, were there a lot of mixed race kids around you growing
Right.
up? Because like now in the Pacific Northwest, I see a lot of mixed race kids, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that is this. Did you grow up in a different era?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nowadays you can't throw a stick without hitting a mixed race child. Not that you want to throw sticks at children, but
But if you did,
if you did,
But if you
yeah,
did.
you'd hit one 100% of the time. Yeah, no, I think growing up it was very much not that way, and I think it's funny because New York is this kind of seen as this very diverse place, but at least in my own experience, it was me and my sister, and those were the only mixed race people who I knew. And so I think the way that popular culture tends to paint like people of mixed race identity tends to fall in like very, I don't know, relatively stereotypical lines, like a person who's just like very confused, doesn't fit in one place or the other, is constantly questioning where they belong. And obviously I think there are aspects of that are true, and I think certainly reflect parts of my own experience, but I think for the most part I didn't necessarily embody it too much, especially as an adolescent and a youth. It's not something that like I don't think I could have named. I saw myself as being Chinese or being Chinese American, and I think it was contingent upon the people who I was introduced to, whether or not they would accept me as that. But I myself, I think, had a lot of conviction in a way that I lost later on in life. And we can get into that too. But I think when I was young, I felt very close to that culture because, again, like growing up with my mom, the cousins on my mother's side were the cousins who I was frankly closest to. And so those parts of the identity were like much stronger. And then when I went to high school, it was a predominantly Jewish high school. And so I think because I had this experience of not fitting the mold of what a Jewish or Jewish American looks like, it was easy for me to just say, oh, actually, like I would never even talk about my Jewish identity. I would just say, oh, yeah, I'm Chinese American. And people would be happy to leave it at that. And because there were very few Asian Americans in my high school, no one would just question like whether or not that was accurate or not either.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I don't know if you've ever felt like some of this is painful. Like I have so many questions, but I feel like some sense of, just to be totally transparent, like some sense of unease about probing a lot. Because I do think it's painful. I think I am not mixed race, so I don't know, but in my imagination, it's somewhat akin to being the only Asian at your school and then like excluded for that. But then I feel like maybe if you're mixed race, it's a little bit like doubled because you're maybe not accepted one place or the other. You know what I mean? Like you're in the in between. And even if you meet another mixed race person, if they're not coming from the same mixed race background as you, it can also still be hard to connect just on the basis of being from two or more racial or cultural backgrounds. And I am very curious. It's also, I think Susan or Kate said before, it feels very personal to me because my kids are also white and Asian. And they're too young to really articulate, what's really going on for them. And I feel like growing up in Seattle, it's a little easier because there are many mixed race kids and there are like many, especially white and Asian mixed race kids at my son's school. But at the same time, yeah, and we'll get into more of this. I feel like there are ways in which it will probably be hard for them in ways that they feel apart from even me because they're going through a different experience than I am because they read different than I do. And so anyway, just to pause there,
Yeah, I'm happy to move on to your later teenage years.
Wait, can I just say a naive perception that I had, though? Of my perception as a kid of other mixed race kids? I
Yes.
thought that they were beautiful.
That's another, but that is
Dang.
another stereotype I feel like of
I
mixed race people is,
know.
oh, they're also like attractive and exotic looking. But I feel like, I don't know, Daniel, how you feel about that, because I feel like it's a double-edged sword.
Have you been objectified, Daniel, by people like
By monoracial people. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the
I
time.
am-
All the time.
Wait, no, I'm saying, honestly, I was like, oh, Hapa people are so cool looking. And then I also thought they can go to more clubs. Like they can, no, not dance clubs.
Oh, yeah.
No, I don't.
You
I'm
mean
not
like
into
more
dance
like
clubs.
high school clubs?
Like affinity clubs.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying I saw them as chameleons who could be with the white folk and be with the Asian folk.
Mm.
Like they had more spaces of affinity that they could go to. Like I didn't
Oh.
see it as that they were so different that they'd be othered and excluded. I saw it as, wow, you can be a chameleon. So that was my
Mm.
perception growing up.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on the kind of mixed race, right? Because I think if you're talking about half white, half Asian, which now I think Gen Z, they call them Wasian. Back then, we used to say Hapa, right? But now I think it's like Wasian is the term.
Yeah.
You could be white passing, depending on how exotic you look. But I think when we went to college, and I met a lot of other types of mixed race, like Black and Asian, Blasians, or like half Black, half white. I had a half Black, half white friend in college who had he grew up with his mom's white family, and he was just like, I was the only not white person in all the family gatherings, and he felt super othered. So I think there's this sort of like thing depending on the kind of mixture you are, which that also how the world treats you may be different.
Yeah, as it relates to colorism and contrast. Okay.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I think the history too, it's like the idea that like if you're half Black and half Asian, for example, at least in the literature, again, this isn't my particular makeup, but is that in some ways the Black community is more quick to embrace you because of like old like blood quantum laws, right? Around like the single drop, right? And so the idea that like if you're any part Black, then it's okay, like you're in our community. Whereas I think the Asian American community, again, like writ large, just has a little bit more ornery around like what counts, quote unquote, as being part of that community.
And the
yeah.
elders are kind of racist.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Oh, Susan has. I mean, Jeanette has a question.
Yeah, no, it's more of a comment, and I feel like now we're like getting a little bogged down in and it's fine. This is the way it goes. But I just wanted to also add that I think historical context also matters a lot, at least for Koreans, and I think probably, and maybe it's not true for Chinese Americans because you guys have had a different history, and maybe Vietnam. I think maybe there's some elements of this too, but not in my generation, but in the previous generations. If you were mixed race Korean, a lot of those people were the results of American GIs being in Korea. And there's honestly like a lot of stigma around those relationships, right? Because like many of them were consensual and mutually respectful. You produced long-lasting relationships, but some of them were, Korean government has a history of providing Korean prostitutes to military people,
Comfort women,
comfort like
Korea.
even Korean troops, I believe, and as well as American troops. So there is this whole stigma of, okay, if you are the product of that kind of relationship, then Korean society very much stigmatizes that, even though like your government is the one. It's very complicated and like dumb, I think. But it's different now. But I do remember like when I was dating Jake, I felt, even though I'm time-wise like at least 30 or 40 years removed from that generation, I still felt some of the weight of that historical context. And so I think it also depends, right, on the historical circumstances around like people's perceptions around how those relationships came about, like what's the relationship between the two ethnic or racial groups. So I think there's a lot of just like layers and context here, right? And
Yeah. I think quickly to go on that, I think with the Chinese immigrants, it's very different because I feel like in America, actually, white Americans saw in the early 20th century, right, miscegenation was illegal in like no state. But I think when Chinese and white Americans started having children, the Chinese saw it as good because they almost saw it as marrying up. Your kids have whiter skin, bigger eyes. Like it was like, Daniel, you can correct me if this is wrong, but this is a general. I don't think Chinese had a negative, in the United States, had a negative perspective on it. Even I feel like Chinese in China didn't have that kind of negativity or stigma around it that Jeanette, you were describing with the mixed race Korean kids. But the white Americans, I think, stigmatized that for a long time. And even today, I think Chinese people see, like, I have Chinese American friends who married white men, and they're like, Chinese family is like so excited for the mixed race babies because they're really cute. That's the Chinese white like history. And it's you're right, Jeanette, it's very different perceptual, like from a perception perspective and stigma perspective from that history that you just described. I don't know about Vietnamese, Susan.
Yeah, they're called Amerasian. Is that Amerasian? Is that
Amerasians, I think.
Yeah.
Or you're Asian? No, not you're Asian.
Amerasian.
Amerasian.
And same thing with the GIs being there during the Vietnam War. And so I remember growing up when I was a kid, there was one auntie that she just looked a little bit different. And it was like, oh, she's Lai, like me Lai, like it mixed. But the thing is, her Vietnamese, she could throw it down so hard. You know what I mean? There was like, I didn't see her face. She was a Vietnamese auntie to me, right? Like in terms of her mannerisms and what she cooked and how she reared the children. It was, if you knew everything else, it was fine. You know what I mean? As you can still be a part of the collective and hold it all, right? And it was like, I never ran into a situation where the mixed people didn't know. Like that they always knew the language. They always knew all the customs. And so it was, and we wouldn't, of course, we don't, PTSD, the war, we never talked about the past.
Well, because the moms were the Vietnamese, right? And never the other way around.
Yes.
Right.
So it was always just noted, right? And the author Nguyen Phan Gui Mai, she talks about Amerasians in Death Child a little bit. So anyways, it's just, it's a part of our history for sure. But I think that there was so much around, let's make this work as a culture. And if it's not taking away the energy, it's fine. It's fine, right? But I think it was like, can you throw it down? You know what I mean? And not disrupt the harmony. All right. Shall we talk now? Should we talk about college age Daniel?
College age Daniel.
You mentioned earlier, Daniel, that you didn't have the sense of stigma, or like you were very proudly Chinese American when you were younger, but then you alluded that things change as you got older.
That's right. Yeah. I think as I got older, I began to see more people like me in the world. And so that was really exciting. Like I went to a very small liberal arts college in Ohio, which, Ohio is not particularly diverse, but
Oberlin.
Oberlin.
Say Oberlin. Haven't went to Oberlin. I love Oberlin.
Wait,
Who
went to?
My cousin.
Your cousin? Oh,
My cousin.
Oh, wait, yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Who I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Daniel and Nancy Nguyen too, right?
I do know Nancy, of course. We were classmates as well. Yeah. So I went to Oberlin, which in itself isn't like the most diverse place on earth in the most diverse state on earth, but there were actually a lot of mixed Asians. And for the first time I felt, to your point, Susan, about being able to join clubs, there were actually a lot of clubs that I could join around Asian American identity, Chinese American identity, both like on the cultural side as well as like a political activism side. And because Oberlin is very known as being like a hotbed of like student activism and resistance, there were a lot of opportunities to plug into these larger ideas about ethnic studies and trying to bring like Asian American history and classes to the college. And for me, it was this sort of just engage in a way where no one really saw me as being outside that experience. And I was really like welcomed in, I think just because, again, the population was so small, but it was also like a very feisty, fired up population that it was like anyone who wants to be part of the cause, like absolutely, like we're going to have them involved. And there were a lot of like mixed Asian upperclassmen who took me in under their wings. It's made me see like what it could look like to be in this world as a mixed person and also still feel really close to one's own Asian American identity. So it was a real big changing, like sort of big turning point for me. And by the time I graduated, I had this sense that like I wanted to go and live in China, because at that point I still didn't know anything about the language. I'd still never gone to China. And I felt like this was going to be the moment, right? I graduated during the recession. We're very close in age. And so I graduated in 2009, and it was like, there's no chance that I want to stay in the US. If there's an opportunity to go abroad and do that, I would love to take it. And so there was this chance to go teach and work in rural China through a fellowship program that was offered through Oberlin and this university in China. And I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to go. And so prior to going, I felt like this is great. Like this will answer all my questions, right? I'll finally be able to like touch base with quote unquote the motherland and learn Mandarin and be accepted as like a Chinese American person, and all of the boundaries and confusions about my identity would all be sorted out. And of course, I think you could see where this narrative goes. I arrive in China, and instead of any clarity at all, I just met with more questions and more confusion, and not seen as being Chinese really at all by the people who I was interacting with at the university. I was very much coded as foreigner. I was very much coded as a white foreigner. And when people discovered that I was Chinese, it was like a point of inquiry. I think to your point, Kate, too, like there was like this excitement around the fact that, oh, this is a person who harbors some of the same like cultural background and cues that we do, but looks this particular way. And that was like exciting because folks in that rural town had never really been introduced to foreigners at all, let alone like mixed race foreigners. And it was like an experience for me of shedding like the desire to want to cleave to any single sense of my own identity, which I think was a very positive thing. But I was still like the sort of the purpose and the catalyst for going and what drove my desire to continue like studying Mandarin and exploring my Chinese American identity afterwards, I think all stems from a very strong insecurity of not feeling like enough or not feeling like as much a part of the community. And the sense that I think about my like Toysan cousins all the time, like they never really had anything to prove to anybody. Like they for the most part haven't necessarily had the desire to go to China, haven't had the desire to learn Mandarin or progress in their sign language skills. It was just like, this is a fact of who they are, and they're coded as being Chinese American. And there was really nothing that was, nothing that they needed to do to get people on board with kind of like how they saw themselves in the world. But I think there was this dissonance between my perception of myself and the way that society saw me that I was pushing up against. And then like made this whole like pivot in my career around like China and Asian American identity issues. I think partly because, yeah, there was a great sense that I wanted to like prove to be something that I think maybe, yeah, had I not had the experience of being like more insecure about that part of myself, then maybe my trajectory would have gone a different direction.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. Like you're looking for belonging. And I think that's like such a natural part of any person's kind of journey of growing up and figuring out what that means.
Man, Daniel, I'm like +1 right now. I remember after I finished college, I was like, what's the most scary thing for me to do? It's to go back to Vietnam and find my identity. And then all the Vietnamese people were like, you're so fat. Are you Hawaiian? Are you Filipino? Are you Korean? I was like, no, I'm Vietnamese. They're like, yeah, are you Filipino? Are you Hawaiian? Are you Korean? I was like, I'm still Vietnamese. And so I just wonder, there's so many of us that go back to look for those answers. And I don't think that the people living in that country understand actually how hard it is for us to come back. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's this part of the chapter, right? Like it's a part of the thing that you must do for yourself. And irregardless of what the answers you're going to find, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, and even as a
Monoracial person.
monoracial person, my family in China would ask me, do you feel more American or more Chinese? Or the worst question they would ask, so crazy now that I think about it, to ask like a 9-year-old, if China and America went to war, which side would you pick? No, I'm serious. I don't know if they asked you guys this question, like, but I was just like, even then I was like, I can't choose one. But it put me in a hard position. So I think you're absolutely right, which is that the people in the country that who are monoracial, but in the country, like in China, Vietnam, Korea, they think of identity as like black and white. Whereas I think what Daniel has been sharing with us, and even the three of us can feel, even as monoracial people, but who grew up in the US, is that it is a continuum, and there's people inhabit different parts of the continuum at different points in their life. And even different people will occupy very different places, even if they're the quote same admixture of races. And I think that's something that is so hard
Yeah, and I think
to really explain to someone who is monoracial in the monoculture. I
yeah.
guess.
And I think the perception changes so much too. I think stemming from what you all have been saying, I think in some circumstances, it very much can feel like there's the double stigma of not fitting in anywhere. But I think in many other places, there's like the enormous privilege of being able to pass and having that fluidity to go between groups. I think I read somewhere that like mixed race people have like statistically like the most diverse group of friends, because and in some ways that makes sense. It's like they themselves are used to like being coded differently to different people. And so there's a natural consequence, I think you end up associating with people from like a pretty wide demographic spectrum. And so I think, yeah, like there are situations where, again, like maybe it's nice to be quote unquote exotified as being really beautiful or having great hair or whatever, like aspects of being mixed race. And then in other situations, like it can feel very infantilizing, or it can feel very prejudiced or just like ignorant. So it totally depends. And I think there's so much of like my own experience that I feel like if only I could control the narrative to my own story, then I'll figure it out. But I think like all of us, we experience the world not only through the ways that we see ourselves in the world, but the way that we're being perceived by others. And that's not within our control. That we don't have any agency over that. And so we have to take like good things with the really like bad situations as well.
Speaking of other people, can I ask a gossipy question? I'm
You can
very
ask me
curious.
any question. Yeah.
My first boyfriend in high school, half Japanese, half white. His mom is Japanese, and he only ever dated like East Asian women. In fact, he's married. Actually, he's married to Cambodian American. And so I'm curious for you in your dating life,
Yeah.
how that played out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
It's okay. Kate's known me for 8 years. We can do this.
Okay,
We can,
okay.
Kate gets a pass. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was like I never dated like a Chinese person from China, but I've certainly like dated Chinese Americans. I've dated white Americans. I'm married to a white American. I've dated mixed race folks too, who have a similar makeup to me. And yeah, I think they were all like, I think at the time I wasn't necessarily considering all those things, right? It's like you are attracted to someone, you have commonality, you have things to talk about, and you decide you want to like continue to see them. But in retrospect, I mean, there were moments where I think, especially when I was dating other mixed race folks, that was like, man, this would be wild to imagine having a child who themselves, not that like the consequence of any relationship has to result in a child, but like the idea that if things were to progress and we did have a child, like the idea that what y'all have been saying, it's like that child would actually have a more similar experience to our own than as a typical mixed race child, right? Who is coming from two monoracial parents. If their parent themselves was mixed race and they are mixed race, like we as parents could actually convey a whole lot about the experience that can help them understand what it means to be growing up in that space, which was like really exciting. And I actually have a friend in Seattle who she and her husband are both mixed and their kid is mixed, and that's that dynamic at play. So I can live vicariously through their lives. But I will say, and this is something that I haven't actually shared with very many people, it's like, I think dating other like monoracial Asian American women was actually really hard for me. And it's not something that I have done a lot of. I think because of that insecurity, I felt people would see me in the world as like not coded. And I think again, like there's all this like weird stigma, right, around who we date and dating outside of our race. But I think because I was so intent, and again, for better or worse, so intent on being like a cultural bearer of Chinese American identity, that if I was dating someone who was coded as much more Asian American than I was, then I think by the consequence of that, I would be seen as like a sort of white passing like person who was not in any way connected to that culture, that heritage. And for whatever reason, that was like something that I couldn't bear. Like it's such a weird thing to admit, to think about, but I think that's very true. Like I needed to hold on to that in a way where I couldn't let someone like outshine me in that particular capacity. And it's very embarrassing to admit, but here we are admitting it. Yeah.
It's like you were out-Asianed, basically.
Yes,
You felt
exactly.
out-Asianed in a relationship with a Chinese or an Asian American.
I think
That's right,
so
yeah.
personal to share, though. I actually really
Yes,
appreciate you
it is.
sharing that, because it's like one of these weird, like these things that like when you say them out loud, you're just like, it's weird. But then we have all these driving forces that, whether they're rational or not, right, shape our decisions. And I think that, yeah, so thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
But how complicated, right?
Yeah,
like
it's very complicated.
it's not
Very
like I'm just in a relationship with you and we're just dating and we're eating tacos. It's like you're also in a relationship with your struggle and conflict, right?
Culture,
So
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
like
to
that
manifest
person
that
who's
opportunity.
receiving you, there's so much going on for you that how can you build that intimacy when you have this barrier in a way, this separation that they might not even be
Do
conscious
they know?
of.
Did
yeah.
you ever
Yeah.
say this to any of the
No, I don't think I
Asian
ever
American-
did.
No.
I don't think I ever did. Yeah, I'll send them the recording after. Yeah,
Yeah, ladies out there,
yeah, it's not you. It really was me. It really, yeah.
it really was. Oh,
It really was me. Yeah.
wow. Oh my gosh.
I think it is really important because when you think about what a cultural identity means to someone, it's very different and also along a spectrum. Like not all Asian Americans are made equal, right? Even mono-racial Asian Americans. And so I've personally even felt a little bit like that with Chinese American guys that I've dated. I haven't dated very many of them, but almost whether consciously or unconsciously, like how Chinese are you, right? Because just because you're Chinese American, it doesn't mean that linguistically, culturally, identity-wise, you're on the same wavelength. And I think that's something really important to emphasize here because, as Daniel pointed out this entire time, it's not a black and white thing. Not all Asian Americans are the same. Not all Chinese Americans are the same. Not all Asians are the same. Like, it's such a personal
Oh, yeah.
respect.
And then level and intensity, right? But it's also just like bringing back those dynamics from the old country, honestly. Like I've never even dated another Korean American, but I even just interacting with sometimes other Korean Americans or Koreans, it's like everything my parents left Korea for, sometimes it just fucking comes back. Like the class stuff, the like all the non-subtle like reading each other things. Like it's very stressful. Or it can be. I have Korean American friends, but I'm just saying it's like the intensity of, oh, how Asian are you? But it's also let's face it, it's like sometimes in our countries of origin, there are dynamics, as there is in America, that are not all good, right? And like those things can really come like rushing back. So it is very
Absolutely.
complicated.
Wait, guys, can I tell you a story that I've never told anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Does
I
it
had
involve
just
a cult?
Oh no, no! I already told that
Yeah,
story
no,
to millions of
I
people.
I want another cult. I want to.
Well, so I just graduated college. I was working for USAID in like sustainable cocoa industry or whatever, and I was working with farmers. And so there was a coworker, and he was crushing on me, and I was like, whatever, I'm single, I can crush back. And so we went on a date, and so he's Vietnamese, but he's also like an ethnic minority too. But I'm just saying he is from Vietnam, grew up in Vietnam, right? And so I remember us going out to dinner, and he like ordered so much food for me. It was all my favorite dishes. And I was like, great. And so I was eating, and then he kept insisting I eat. And I was like, eventually I was like, I'm good. And he kept insisting that I eat. And then I was like, this is getting weird. And then I was trying to ask him about his life, his family, all this stuff in my very broken Vietnamese. And then I realized he just kept forcing me to eat. Like, he didn't ask me about my stuff. He didn't, but also he was not respecting my no. You know what I mean? Like, where it was very clear. Like, I was really fucking done eating. And he just, that was like the only thing he could do to convey care. But also there was this like big disconnect between anything I was saying and the role that he wanted to be for me.
And then if you've read Susan's memoir, you know that is a very traumatic part of her childhood, being forced. Remember that one time where you were made to stay at the dinner table to finish that, whatever that one
Squid and
slimy dish
chives.
you didn't like.
Yeah.
Oh, squid and chives because you didn't like it, and your mom forced you to stay at the dinner table, and everybody else was asleep.
Yeah.
Like that's very traumatizing, right? In that sense of this in a prospective romantic partner in a totally different context.
Right. But it was like, but besides the food thing, it was more like that this very Vietnamese male could not allow me to be anything else besides what he expected Vietnamese women to be. Do you know what I mean? And it was in that moment that I had, for so long, I was embarrassed that I was Yet Gil, which is overseas Vietnamese. And then that was when it clicked in me, and I was like, no, I actually can't, like, or this Vietnamese guy, but I was like, no, I am American. I am so American because I have opinions. I have agency, and I'm going to say no to things. But I think, especially in his culture in the mountains where he grew up, women really behaved a certain way. And it was, so I just remember, and then I was like, and then I looked at his long ass pinky nail. And I was like, is that for snorting coke? But no, I didn't ask him that, but really it's for tasting fish sauce.
Oh, really? Oh, in China, a lot of men use
Yeah,
it
it's
for
different
like
in China.
nose-
Yeah, or like
Yeah.
ear picking.
No-
Yeah,
nose-
that's interesting.
Yeah,
you're picking.
I mean,
Yeah.
whatever. It's a tool that is not sanitized. And I was just sitting there. I was like, oh, yeah, I am definitely Vietnamese American. You know what I mean? There was such a grasping for being Vietnamese enough. And how can I learn this? And then finally I was like, that's one thing, part of my heritage that I'm not okay with. Right?
But was it a sense of relief for you, Susan? Also, even for Daniel, when after you went to China, you were like, okay, maybe I can stop this fantasy dream of this Chineseness in me, but I'm like Chinese or Asian American. Do you know what I mean? Did it bring some sense of relief to find that, to shatter the illusions in a sense, right? Or was it stressful? It seemed like, Susan, you weren't stressed out
Yeah,
about
what was it
but
like for you,
Daniel,
Susan?
Yo, I remember so I lived in Vietnam for 8 months and in Hanoi for a little bit and then mostly in the South. And I just saw so many other gradients of overseas Vietnamese that came over. And like some that didn't know the language when I was like, okay, I'm a language. I've been studying Vietnamese in college for a little bit and I grew up understanding Vietnamese. And so I just started to see gradient. And I just started to see everyone is on their own effing journey. And over time, and also I learned a lot of agricultural Vietnamese that I don't use today. But I think I came to a point where I was like, it was a settling. It was a settling into me, and that, okay, everyone sees me as a triple XL whale. I'm a size 6, and that's what they see me as, and it's so repulsive to them. Okay. Took me time to feel that agitation over and over again, and their deep ass confusion, because guess what? My last name Liu is also a first name in Vietnamese. So then they would look at my passport and be like, oh, her last name must be Susan, and her first name is Liu.
Liu Susan.
Yeah, and then they would be like, Liu? And I was like, no. Because it was so much of like feeling flipped. But then I think I needed to spend that time for me to just know that I can define that Vietnameseness, and what does it really mean to be Vietnamese? I needed to go back, and I don't speak perfect Vietnamese. It's getting worse over the years because I speak it less and less, but it was just so important for me to just to shatter that illusion of what is this mystical motherland? What is it really like? And it's just a whole bunch of humans running around that all happen to speak Vietnamese. And it was great for it to be demystified, that everyone actually just is human at the end of the day.
How about
Yeah, I
you,
totally
Daniel?
agree.
Tell us.
Take away.
Because I'm
Yeah,
just
no,
like,
I
how
think-
could I manage this for my children? But I feel like what I'm getting is it's going to be painful nonetheless. But Daniel, tell us.
Yeah. I think the researching journey is important, and I think it is a rite of passage for a reason for folks who have this protracted relationship with, at least in the Asian American context. But I think I totally agree with you, Susan. I think there was a great deal of clarity that I gleaned from the experience, the sense that there was this idealized fantasy of feeling like, if only my grandparents hadn't left, what would it have been like to sort of like be born and grow up in this society, in this culture, in this particular context. And then being able to see that play out, not necessarily where I was like rooted at the university in northern China for a while, because that's like very far culturally, linguistically, everything from southern China where my parents immigrated or my mom immigrated. But having the chance to even go down there and meet this like very like second cousins, aunt, once removed, whatever, like person, like the only sort of living relative who, to our knowledge, like still lives in China.
Okay, so
And
you
being
were
able
able
to
to
get
get
a
a
sense of
family
that life.
member. You were able.
Yes.
Okay, that's
This is many years later, but I was eventually able to go see a family member. And it was exactly that experience. I think there was this huge sense that, oh, maybe our experiences aren't so different. There's like a lot of commonalities that we have from like stemming from the same family tree. But the way that I saw that life inflected, I think was a good mirror to me to basically understand like, oh, actually, there are a lot of like very immutable differences that we experience in the way that we see ourselves and the way that we exist in the world. And like, I can put it to rest. Yeah, like I can understand that's like a world that will not be accessible to me, that I have no agency over, that I have no, in some ways, no relationship like to. As much as I would have wanted to feel like this is some deeply rooted part of my own story, like the reality is that my story is actually quite different. And I think that was like something that came up a lot during the pandemic, right? This feeling that there is this shared cultural consciousness, if not among like Pan-Asian identity, at least among like Chinese and Chinese American diaspora. And what was really shocking to me, one of the many things that were shocking to me in 2020 was like the degree to which it felt like these different factions of this diasporic experience were in some ways at odds with each other. And this is something that I talk about in the book a little bit too, but like this feeling that like Chinese Americans who had been in the States for a while were able to set themselves apart from like more newly arrived Chinese immigrants in creating this wedge and feeling like we immigrated here for the right reasons, we did it in the right way, and these newer immigrants are in some ways like doing something wrong. And we're scapegoating those newer immigrants for that. And so we're saying like they were the ones who brought this virus and they're the ones who are actually making us look bad because no one can really discern the difference between Chinese and Chinese American. And so the idea that like Chinese immigrants come, maybe they don't speak English as well, right? Because they haven't been in the country as long. They have different like cultural values. Their relationship with like other Americans is also different. Like the idea that that tangibly is like grating on the integrity of, right, this like Chinese American community. And it's like making us have less value as a result, I think was very shocking to me. And I don't think it's like unique to the Chinese American experience, but was something that to me felt like, okay, there is this actually very real distinction between these two particular groups. And like, I very much cleave to one side over the other.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that totally makes sense. I see the same thing among Korean Americans. Like it just, and then it's compounded by the fact that different waves of immigration happen under largely different circumstances, right? So like the very first wave, if there was a small wave of Korean who came to Hawaii to work in the sugarcane fields, etc. And then like really over the next 50 years, my understanding is many Korean Americans came over for graduate studies. They tended to be from the wealthier families in Korea. And then really like in the 80s and 90s and like continuing to the early 2000s, there was a much wider range of social economic backgrounds. That's the wave that my family came over in, who were primarily coming for not for like graduate studies or something like that, but for just better economic opportunity, right? And there is like a lot of, I do see there's both a cleaving, like in the sense like we're a small community, so we go to our churches, we make those connections, people who wouldn't mix in Korea mix in America, but at the same time there is also like like people draw lines. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Daniel, you did your post-college find myself thing. As we move on in your 20s and career, was your mixed race identity still permeating into the career that you did? Or can you just tell me that in broad strokes?
Yeah, I think so. I think the desire to want to like keep a finger on the pulse of what was happening in sort of US-China relations was a driving force in like how I shaped my career. So when we met, right, I had come back from China, I started grad school and was studying international relations, really just for the explicit desire of wanting to go back and be abroad. Like I didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do. International relations, like it had the word international in it, right? So I was like, oh, this is great. So this will allow me to travel. That was like literally the amount of understanding I had at the time of what it like a master's program would actually dictate to me was just not necessarily any clarity in terms of career path, but just this is something that I enjoy and this would be a conduit to be able to continue doing it. I think I wanted to put off having a quote unquote real job for as long as possible. And so after grad school, then I ended up going back out to China. Instead of living in a very rural area in northern China, I was based in Beijing. Hugely different experience in terms of the kinds of amenities and also just like the interaction that you have with people from all different places as opposed to it being like a majority Chinese population. And so I was working for an NGO there that was working on financial inclusion through the means of microfinance. And so this was like obviously past the heyday of Muhammad Yunus and all that, but my concentration was around international development. And so I went in with the idea that I would do like these microloans. And we would go to these small rural areas in China and like work with farmers and entrepreneurs and business people and trying to like give them capital to be able to start their own businesses and have that be a conduit towards transforming their lives and upward social mobility and all the things that microfinance was touted to have been doing. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I was working at this NGO that used to be government run called like a Gongo, so a government owned NGO, a very particular sort of like Chinese characteristic, but it was like a 2,000 person company. I was the only foreigner who was there. And again, it was similar in some ways to the experience teaching at the university. Like I was very much coded as being like a foreigner who spoke English, spoke Mandarin enough to get along with my colleagues and be able to like have meetings and everything like that. But I was the person who like when kind of queries would come in or when people who were doing due diligence or like loan offices from other countries or prospective funders from Europe, for example, were coming, I would be the one to liaise with them and give them tours and tell them the ropes about the organization and all those kinds of things. So it was fun in different ways. But at the end of the day, I felt this is fundamentally not my world. Like my expertise and my skill set is not in actually like speaking in dialect and engendering the trust of like rural Chinese folks from outside of major cities. That's a job that's much more suited to people who were born in those places and who grew up among those communities. And so again, it was that sort of similar feeling where it was like, as much as it hurt to feel like this is not really my place and this is not a part of my experience, at the end of the day, I felt this is not fundamentally something that I can claim to have like special capacity to do. And I ended up coming back to the States. My partner at the time, now a wife, was finishing up her graduate studies. And so we met at school, and then I promptly left for 2 years to go to China, where we did long distance and then came back until she finished up her degree. And then very quickly after we moved to Seattle. And when I moved to Seattle, this is when we reunited, Susan, and we're shortly after I met you, Kate, was we went at this board volunteer fair, I remember, at the Gates Foundation, or that the Gates Foundation was hosting. I like didn't have a job at the time. I had really wanted to get into stuff relating to US China. And I thought Seattle, it's like proximally was so much closer to Asia than New York, DC, all these other places. And yet it felt like there was actually very few opportunities to engage in that world. And so it was surprising and also quite distressing because I was very like intent on doing that. That was something that, again, for better or worse, was carrying on my shoulders of, oh no, I have to like continue on this particular lineage because it says something about who I am and my place in the world. And then you very helpfully got me a job in consulting, which is not a career avenue that I would have ever considered. And then that kind of set me off in a different direction for a while. And so long story short, like more recently, I've come back into the China realm. It was mostly because of COVID, right? And that opportunity that we all had to be really introspective about what are the things we hold dear, what are the areas that we want to focus on for the rest of our lives. Life is short. Like we want to make the most of the time we have. And so that's when I got back into, to some extent, how I got back into writing more extensively, but also how I came back into the world of US China. And by extension, I think as we saw with COVID, so much of xenophobia led into the uptick in anti-Asian hate and discrimination. And so the way that the organization that I started working for in 2020 that I still work for now was couching all those issues was it became part of this larger continuum. And so now we do a lot of work on raising awareness about the Asian diaspora in America, but a lot of that was set in place because of what we experienced in 2019, 2020. And so found my way back into that world and am there now, which I'm grateful for. But like all of us, right, we've all been through very winding journeys in order to get there.
Susan
Oh,
has a
wait,
question.
Daniel, can I just say, if we were ever to take a survey of how Asian are,
You're hella Asian, dude.
I just feel like you're so invested in the cause and what it means for the diaspora and what it means for our rights and for being visible in this country. Like, so much more than like most Chinese dudes I know. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
just like, what's up? I'm eating chicken wings. Like, they're not actually. It's a very
Yes.
interesting thing for you to be born in this situation and for you to have that childhood and then how much you've dedicated to the heritage and to the honoring and to the justice of it all. And also, I want you to know, Daniel, that if you don't do that in your career, I won't think less of you. I know how Asian you are. You know how Asian you are? When we go out to lunch, this man, he is on his tea game. And how he like looks and how we share food. Actually, Daniel, I didn't even know you were half Chinese for the longest time. And then we went to lunch and then I was like, what? There's something different about him. Yeah. And then somehow we started, and then somehow you dropped your into China relations. And I was like, oh, okay. I still at that point, I don't think realized
That's
you were.
interesting.
You didn't know.
The first time I'm
Well,
hearing
you
this.
said it
Okay,
was
can I
into
just-
China relations?
Can I just make a what? Okay, I want to say deeper point, but maybe that's too self-congratulatory.
Ouchie.
Sorry, no,
ouchie.
okay, but is that how much we rely on how people look to make assumptions of where they're coming from and their
Yes.
life story, right? So, Susan, it's a really awkward question in America to ask. Oh, who are your
Where are you
parents?
from?
Where are you
Yeah.
from? Where are you really
Yeah.
from? Where?
Mhm.
And Daniel would have said, "Oh, my mom's from Cuba." So
Yeah.
right? But so I'm just saying, for better for worse, mostly for worse probably, but in America we just really still depend on people's appearances to make a lot of assumptions about who they are. And so I think that's what's difficult about being multiracial and multicultural is if you don't read a certain way, you're going to be immediately like high possibility from being misunderstood. Even if you are, I look Asian, but I'm actually culturally very American or I'm Asian, more Western in this way. And I think so that is part of just what's like,
Yeah, I
even
think the
though you knew-
adoptee
yeah.
experience is so interesting there too.
Yeah.
Daniel, I know you mentioned earlier that COVID changed a lot of things for you, perspective-wise, work-wise, but then also you said you started writing more. And as we know, you published a book this year, which I have read. I'm sorry I don't have it with me, but Susan Goody Two Shoes has it right in front of her. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey? Because I feel like everything that we've talked to up to this point is coalescing around the last few years. A lot of things have started coming together or being tied together for you. Can you talk a little bit about that journey towards writing this book, which very much is about exploring identity across cultures?
Absolutely. I think the guiding force of the questions that I was curious about in the book really stemmed from that initial experience that we've been talking about around coming and living and working in rural China in 2009 to 2011. This idea that there was a lot about the experience that I felt like I was on the periphery of, both in terms of the way that like expats and locals were like negotiating friendship and also relationships, and also the way that like even within the expat population, there was like this enormous disparity between the way that men were treated versus women. And then, of course, the way that each of those experiences was inflected with different aspects of Asian, in this case, I guess more substantially like Chinese American identity. And so I think like I feel an enormous responsibility as a writer to render experiences that I don't understand in ways that I can make sense of. And I feel like that's perhaps, I know Ian and Susan, you obviously are both writers as well, like the way that I feel like I see the world or try to make sense of the world is through narrative. And so in order to understand what those various like experiences that I was having, how I could find a new kind of resolution for them, I felt like it was done through writing. And so there were a lot of like blog posts and like little snippets that I had kept from that time. But as we've been discussing, like a lot of the writing can fell into the background, especially during grad school and then moving back to China and then even coming to Seattle. And so it was really around 2018 that I picked it back up again. And I started an MFA program that was low residential, which means that I was still able to work and live full time in Seattle and go to Asheville, North Carolina once every 6 months to do in-person residency. The rest of the time was spent doing packet exchanges. So every 3 weeks, I would send a packet of new and revised work, as well as like critical analysis and different books that I'd been reading to a faculty supervisor, and then they would provide feedback. And this happened 4 times over the course of the program, and then you finish up your degree. Up until that point, I was really writing short stories. I was really like very happy with the medium of short stories. I never desired or had any aspiration to write a novel. But during my very last semester, so this was very end of 2019 going to 2020, that idea, right, of being in rural China reared up again. And I think there was this sense that I didn't actually want to write from a perspective of mixed race identity. I didn't actually want to write from a male perspective, because those are themes that I actually explored in a collection that I'd written a long time ago, back in 2012, called What Never Leaves. But instead, I was really interested in talking about like characters who were on the outsides of some of those experiences that, again, like I wasn't really able to fully like grasp or understand because they weren't identities that I myself have lived myself. So the point of view characters that emerged from that experience was one who was a Chinese national, a young student who was just starting university, not dissimilar from like many of the individuals who I met while teaching. But she herself like is very socially awkward. Like she doesn't have a lot of friends. She's very close to the animals and the pets that she keeps. And so she as a character emerged very quickly as someone who I was just interested in charting her journey. And the other point of view character is a Chinese American teacher named Liz, who is grieving her mother's death, who is coming to China for the first time, in some ways as a way to have this roots-seeking experience, but also to probe aspects of her Chinese identity that growing up, she was not really privy to. Her mom was very quiet about their heritage and didn't necessarily make her feel a lot of pride in accessing aspects of her Chinese identity. Anyway, these two characters meet at this rural university in northern China, and it's the result of this kind of chance encounter that sets their lives off in very different ways. And the initial impetus for the book was to keep it within that time frame, very similar to the time that I myself was in China. But again, as I was writing this, it was late 2019 into 2020. Once the pandemic hit, it felt like the things that I was interested in talking about suddenly were being exemplified on a global scale. It wasn't as if US-China relations was a secret right before, like relations had been steadily worsening, right, since 2015, 2016, since the golden age of the Obama years. But at the same time, it wasn't necessarily on everyone's radar, right? But then once COVID picked up, China was, of course, in the news daily, and it was an impossible thing to avoid. The amount of Asian American discrimination that we experienced, again, wasn't new. The way that has ebbed and flowed over the course of our history is very much ingrained in the laws and the experiences that like we've had as immigrants come to this country. But suddenly it was something that was like foisted in people's faces. Like it was just impossible to avoid. And so it behooved me to feel like taking this narrative and putting into contemporary times would actually do a great service to trying to make sense of some of these larger societal issues that I was really interested in probing. And so that's how the structure of the book ended up shaping during that period.
But Daniel, it's even though we've known each other for so long, I feel like this conversation is giving me so much insight into how your identity has really played a role in your contributions to being Asian American. I think what Susan was saying earlier, where she feels like you're like more Asian than most Asian people, because I'm thinking about, for example, someone like me. I eat Chinese food all the time. I speak Chinese to my kids, but I'm actually not at all really involved in anything related to Asian American identity or even spreading Chinese culture on a level outside of just my children and my immediate kids. And I feel like in a way, what maybe started out as you felt like maybe was maybe a little bit othering you, like your half Chinese, half Jewish identity, has become your superpower because of your being able, because you have one hand in many hand in many pies, you can see them more clearly than the people who are in the pie. Sorry, I'm so embarrassing. Like, if I
Should we be
licking your
cooking
fingers
people?
and putting it in the pie, sorry,
Yeah.
you can see things almost with a clarity that, for example, I couldn't necessarily see. Like when you were saying you became so attracted by exploring the journey of when you're one of your two main characters. I know who you're talking about because I read the book, and I was like, wow, I don't feel any of that desire to inhabit a character I don't know. But maybe it's because I haven't been enough on the periphery to want to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's your superpower, Daniel. It's amazing. As your friend who is now hearing sort of different facets of the story and the motivation, I feel really emotional. Like I really feel odd and also really hopeful because when I think about passing on my Chinese heritage to my children, and I'm a first generation immigrant, there are all these worries. My worry is a little bit different from Jeanette. Jeanette's maybe a little bit worried about some of the traumas or some of these. My worry is that my sense of identity isn't going to be passed down enough to my kids because they're going to be half Indian, half Chinese, all American. And what I'm hearing from you as an adult who is biracial is that you've explored that so deeply, these cultural identities, in a way that I feel like I, as a monoracial person, haven't even explored. And so I feel a lot of hope for my children.
That is a very, very sweet and very generous, Kate. This is great. I want to talk with y'all all the time. This is amazing.
I'm really being sincere because I feel it's like an unknown for me, right? Like Jeanette was saying earlier, the three of us are monoracial. We don't know what it's like to inhabit the identity of a biracial person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I tend towards negative thinking. I'm just like, oh, they're going to lose all their Chinese like heritage. I was just like very fatalistic thinking, which is so Asian too. Yeah. Anyways, Jeanette, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, I think Daniel was going to respond. And then I do have a follow-up.
Yeah. I think, one thing that has come up a lot in various conversations that I've had for the last couple of weeks about the book was like the decision to write characters who were women, right? I think that's like sort of one piece. And I think also writing characters who are outside of my own experience. Like, why didn't I write a mixed race protagonist, for example? Like the decisions around that. And I think I've given a lot of different answers, but I think especially germane to this conversation is this sense of, being able to like walk in other people's shoes. I think there is this enormous gulf that I experienced that we've been talking about too, about the way that like Chinese nationals and Chinese Americans in some ways see each other, and a huge amount of misunderstanding that happens even within what I perceive as a very reasonably small, like tightly knit diasporic community, to say nothing of the world at large. I think if we're talking about ways in which our experiences can be apprehended badly or misunderstood, there's a wide range. And obviously we point to a lot of the more egregious examples. Oh, like white nationalists, like pure, like out and out racists. But the fact that this can happen within this like very small scale, I think was very disarming for me. And so to me, it felt like if there is any responsibility of a writer, if it's like to be able to render the experiences of people very different from us in a way that is able to convey a degree of empathy or a degree of greater understanding. And so if I was writing characters that I myself understood so clearly and so discreetly, I don't think that I would be doing service to the work that I think that I would hope other people are experiencing. And so I feel like I had to go outside of my own lived experience to be able to write characters that I could see with enough authenticity that hopefully others could also perceive in a way that gave them a greater sense of what it means to inhabit these worlds.
Oh man, Daniel, I haven't read your book, I'll just be honest, but I have to go read it now. My experience is reading things about the Korean or Korean American experience in English medium is actually very hard for me. It's very cuts to the core, like nothing else really. I don't know if you guys have that experience, but it's both painful because you have this private experience that living as an outside person with this cultural experience in you, in a general culture that does not share it, is very personal, right? It's like almost a secret you've had to keep and guard. And then to see it being portrayed in books or TV or whatever, but then not what you think is the right way is so incredibly painful to me. It's so weird. It is. It just makes me cringe like no other. And it's like double cringy when the broader Western kind of critics, like blah, 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 are like loving it. But because it makes me feel double misunderstood. So you're treading into dangerous territory, Daniel. But I also admire you for doing it because it's in some ways it's like to put something out there that you've had to guard and keep for a lot of your life that's not shared with others is incredibly vulnerable, I think. I did want to shift the conversation a little bit and ask about any thoughts. And this is like going to bleed into hopefully a second recording we'll do with you on fatherhood. But in terms of your experience growing up as a biracial person, if you feel like there were things that were helpful and things that you wish were different, because one of my main driving reasons for I'm like, I want to do this interview because we're all going about passing on our cultural heritage to our kids in different ways. Obviously, Kate is taking a very, I think, the most intensive approach where she only speaks Chinese to her kids at home and they go to a Chinese bilingual school. And I would say, like, I am taking a relatively light approach. Like, speak Korean pretty well, I read it decently. I think I'm very connected to Korean culture. I'm also a first generation immigrant. My parents were very culturally Korean, not very culturally Western. But at the same time, I am not making a concerted effort, I think intentionally, to teach my kids Korean or take them to Korean school. I think my main goal is that they have a positive affinity for Korean culture. And as they grow up, if they show more interest, that I will follow that. And I imagine it's highly dependent on the family and on the child, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, what has been helpful and what you wish was different. And maybe some of the hard things are probably just inevitable, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. And I've been following, obviously, the various modes that you three have taken, then, of course, even broadening that out to see other friends who are engaging with some of the same questions and concerns and like confusion around how, like, what is the quote unquote the best way to pass on that cultural heritage. One thing that's been really comforting to me is I recently attended a talk with a woman named Helen Kim, who's a sociology professor at Whitman College. So she is Asian Jewish, very similar kind of background, although she ended up converting to Judaism through her husband. So she's monoracial Korean, but she has been Jewish for a very long time now. Her kids are and they're Asian Jewish. She was giving this talk that kind of touched on a lot of things, but a lot of the folks in the room were very anxious type A parents, not to call it anyone here, but I will call out myself as one of these people. We're all raising our hands. This is great. Yeah. But as responding to what she felt was a latent desire in the room, which is the sense that if you are of these multiple different like cultural, religious, ethnic heritages, how do you best set your children up so that they feel like they are welcomed and feel belonging in all of these senses, and also feel a positive affinity with their cultural forebears? And I think her answer was very good in the sense that I think often we feel like maybe we should be doing kind of more of one or more of the other, or like taking turns, or it's one parent is like this whole one parent, one language thing, like one person only does Chinese, the other person only does English, or whether it comes to language stuff or whether it comes to cultural experiences, one person goes to synagogue with the kids and the other person does something totally different based on their affiliation. But her whole thing was like, just do everything. Just open the floodgates, like show the kids absolutely all aspects and don't try to meter it out for them. Don't try to like partition it in any particular way. Just let it be an open floodgate. And kids themselves are resilient. I think there will be a time of great like turmoil and confusion, but on the whole, if they're able to be a receptacle for all of these things, they're going to figure out like how to bucket and categorize all the different experiences and how best to make it make sense for them and play into their holistic sense of who they are. I think similarly, I've been very like trying to be micromanagey about the ways in which I think Kate and I have talked a lot about this too, but I think we're doing very similar things. Like I'm only speaking Mandarin to my daughter and she's attending a bilingual school. And in some ways it feels like I often question a lot of the decisions generally being a parent, but I think especially this one, right? Because it's not even as if Mandarin is a language that connects me to my grandparents in a particular way. Like they don't speak, well, they passed now, but they didn't speak Mandarin. Like none of my relatives speak Mandarin. And so it's in some ways I wonder like, why am I so dead set on doing this thing?
Why?
Yeah, that isn't actually going to bring them closer to their heritage. But I think what I've come around to is the sense that even just the idea of learning a language as a child was an opportunity that I didn't feel like I was able to benefit from. And I think because it had been a world that was what held for me, and it resulted in the twists and turns that I took as an adult, even just providing that opportunity for my own daughter, I felt like that is a way in which she could engage more meaningfully, even despite the fact that there will be increasingly bigger questions that are related to her own identity. She is a quarter Chinese American, very white passing, blonde hair, blue eyes. And so the sense that as someone who doesn't have some of the markers, not that I have a whole lot of markers myself, but who has even fewer markers of what
Yeah.
it means to retain aspects of that identity, language could be a way to actually arm her with something to be able to go into conversations in spaces where, and again, not that she has to prove herself. I don't want her to have to experience what I felt like I had to take on, even though no one told me I had to, but just the sense that I can feel comfortable in a space, I can assert these things that I know and not have to be questioned as much by people as a result. And I think, yeah, providing all of the various tools in which she can chart her own path and decide maybe she doesn't actually want to engage that meaningfully with Chinese after a couple of years, but at least having that sort of foundation and laying that groundwork, I think to me has been something that I wish I had. And it's something that I'm like really consciously trying to pay forward.
I think that's a really beautiful way, Daniel, wrapping up this conversation and leading into hopefully our next one about being a parent, which is that you as parents, our duty or what we can do is to make certain decisions and provide a certain framework. But every child is different and they have, respect the child. That's my kids are in a Montessori school, and that's one of the principles of the Montessori philosophy: respect and follow the child. And I think in this case, like all four of us are just like, we may be chomping at the bit in our own way. Oh, want to pass something. It doesn't have to be culture. It could be other things to our kids. And I think what you've been saying and the lovely answer that you were sharing with us is just, you could just throw everything, put everything you can, but what every child is going to choose will be different. I can even see that in my two children who basically have the same environment, but one is definitely much more inclined to be engaged in Chinese culture, Chinese identity, and the other one is like more of an English expressive child. And so I've been thinking about this. My initial reaction was, yes, put Chinese there. And then it's just like, you have to step back and be like, why? Daniel, I think we're all going through this sort of like, why? And it's all about control. And it's about us. At the
It's
end
so
of the
much about
day,
us.
it's us. Really, that's like the conversation is, it's us. But then maybe we need to think about them. Who are they? Not who are we?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's easy to see a world in which like, oh, I don't want to make my child do all the things that I didn't have the opportunity to do when I was growing up, whether that's like sports or whatever. You take like these like hobbies and interests, but like the same could be very much applied to culture and aspects of that. And it's, yeah, why am I hammering home this point so hard, especially if it feels like a child is like having great resistance to it? So again, yeah, you're totally right. It speaks to my own like deep insecurity about not being able to apprehend those parts of myself, and therefore having this great insecurity that she'll find it similarly. But it may be a totally different relationship, and one that we won't know right until those children get older too.
For me, I'm sorry, I'm taking this in a different direction, but there is this other question in my mind, like where will Asian American identity, like how will it evolve in the next 30 years? Because, so like, I'll tell you about this experience that I had that was really like, that'll stick in my mind forever. Different lifetime, different job. I was in Brazil actually for 3 months doing a project, and I was in Sao Paulo. And I don't know if you might be aware, but Sao Paulo has one of the biggest, if not the largest diaspora of ethnic Japanese people outside of Japan. And so there were people like from my company who were local to Sao Paulo who were on my team. And I was the person who was like, oh, so where are you from? And they're like, I'm Brazilian. And I'm like, no, but where are you really from? And it took 3 or 4 asks for them to be like, oh, my great grandparents are from Japan. And then I would also go to what's equivalent to the ID or Chinatown in Sao Paulo to go eat at a Korean restaurant. And then I would see these Korean young people, like young adults, file in straight out of church. It's just like I was in LA, except I was in Sao Paulo. And instead of speaking English, these people were speaking Brazilian Portuguese. And it was like such a parallel experience. Like I could be these people, but we like grew up in a different country. But my point is, like in Brazil, one thing that I noticed is there was this great wave of Japanese and a little bit more broadly, like Asian migration to Brazil. And then it essentially stopped, right? And more really petered out. And so it's almost like this time capsule of a community that immigrated there and then has been in Brazil for like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 generations now. And they really see themselves as Brazilian. They don't see themselves as a hyphenated identity, even though that community has still remained somewhat like, has like its own, both in the way they look and the network ties that they have. It's like there's like a certain amount of insularity to it. So it made me think about the US, right, where the height of Asian American immigration to this country probably really we've passed the peak, right? Who knows what the future might hold. But what will that identity look like 20, 30 years from now? And I think that there is, for me, a sense of loss to think, oh, just to have my kids say, oh, I'm like, they don't really think about the Korean part of their Korean Americanness. Like they might think of themselves as Pan-Asian, Asian American, or like just American. I don't know who they're going to marry, what their kids will look like, what their cultural heritage will be. Right. And so I think that for me, there is this, it's more than a passing curiosity. Just what does Asian American identity look like in the next few decades? So anyway, big question. Probably, I don't know if anybody has the answer, but I'm just tossing it out there.
light elevator chat.
Okay. All right. Any last thoughts? And then we can move to Insight Thought.
I feel like we have great lead into a next recording about fatherhood. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this chat.
I have too. And I want to get to your question too, Jeanette, because I think it's such a good one. I feel like I don't have a great answer that could be like encapsulated in a short amount of time. But
maybe we can think
maybe we
about
can start
it
with that or
and
something.
then talk about it in the next recording.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. So heavy.
Well,
You could also
That's not a question. I think it's great.
you could write a book about it. Okay, so I really love this chat because when everyone gets Daniel's book Transplants, it's not just a novel and a beach read. It has been powered by so much life experience and so much soul searching that is so beautiful to go along a journey with these characters. So yes, Transplant, his blog is Travel Beats content. Now let's wrap it up with our Insight Thought. My question to everyone is, besides reading Transplants, what book is on your nightstand that you are reading or about to read? Celebrity clickbait is not a book, okay? That does not count. I want to let you know that I'm reading Ocean Vuong's The Emperor of Gladness right now.
Oh,
But also, I just went to a women's summer solstice retreat, as I do, and I'm about to start Women Who Run with the Wolves.
wow. That's such a Susan book.
Myths and stories of the wild woman archetype. Because why not? So yeah, what are you reading right now, or what are you about to read?
This is like it's not going to set me apart in any way, but I just put a hold for Source Code, the Bill Gates memoir about his early childhood. Driven partly by general fascination of very wealthy people. But I think also just without naming specific names, you do feel like some of these billionaires, they're hitting midlife and then their midlife crises are just like, it looks like having like global effects and playing out on a global, very public stage. And it's not like, from my perspective, he hasn't had his own issues, obviously, with his personal, how he conducts his life. But generally, I feel like he has used his money and to do a lot of good in the world. And I am just like curious about him and whether there's anything I could learn from his life for myself or like my kids. And so that's on my reading list. I haven't read it yet. I'm waiting for it.
Daniel?
I feel like the literature that I gravitate towards is so specific, which is like contemporary Asian American literary fiction. I'm like such a cliche. So again, this is part of my
Send it all to
lifelong
me.
pursuit.
I would read all that stuff.
Totally. So in that vein, I'm reading Katie Kitamura's newest novel, Audition. I've loved like everything she's ever written, and I'm about halfway through, where a big twist occurs. More to come, but I've been enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yes, the twist is a critical part of the structure. What about you, Kate?
So I recently finished a book called Love, Queenie by Mayuk Sen. It is a biography of Merle Oberon. I don't know if any of you have either heard of her, but she was one of the great black and white movie stars, and she's an Anglo-Indian, and she kept that identity hidden from Hollywood for like her adult life. And at a time when all the movie stars in Hollywood were basically like white. And so it's a really fascinating look at how she grew up like poor in India, tried to hide her identity, passed off her mother, who was actually her grandmother, as her like Indian servant when she went to the UK and started her movie career. And it's really interesting look at that early part of early Hollywood and how she was basically white passing.
Yeah.
Also, it was edited by our classmate, Melanie Tortoroli, 07, Harvard 07.
I didn't know Melanie.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know. I read the acknowledgments and I was like, did this. Anyway, so that was a cool coincidence. But I really highly recommend the book. Mayuk Sen is an Indian American. And so it's just really cool
look at a forgotten part of history. Okay, so yeah, that's my recent read that I really liked and recommend.
Wait, can I just say Melanie encouraged my now literary agent to go to my show 140 Pounds in New York City.
Really?
And that's how I got my agent.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, Melanie, you're cool. All
Yeah,
right.
cool.
So many great things to read, so many great things to listen to, and so many great things to read. Daniel is the author of Transplants and his blog, Travel Breeds Content, and we are going to have him on us part 2 because there was too much juice to squeeze about fatherhood and more in our next episode. Thanks so much, Daniel, for being on the show.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks,
It's been my great
Daniel.
privilege.
Okay, wait. Okay, so don't leave.
We hope you found something helpful, reassuring, or interesting in this episode of Model Minority Moms. If you enjoyed the episode, please help us spread the word by texting a friend about our show or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to connect with us, please visit our website at modelminoritymoms.com or follow us on Instagram, where we love receiving messages from our listeners.